Greetings, Uncle Travelling Matt here, and it's the end of another day on our Central Asian trip, and I am sitting in my hotel room in yet another new country. I am in Khujand, which is in the Republic of Tajikistan, which is a new country for me. During my last Central Asian trip, I couldn't go to Tajikistan because there was a war on, but there isn't now, so we can get in, and we are in, and we're enjoying it. What I thought I might do, though, is start off by kind of giving a bit of an overview of the stance, because it's not an area of the world that a lot of people know well. So, how many stands are there? Well, we usually count 5. Of course, there are 6 because there's Afghanistan, which is next door. But don't normally count Afghanistan because that was never part of the Soviet Union. Now, I might go into why that is the case and the history of Afghanistan another time, but for the moment, we're talking about the 5 former republics of the Soviet Union. Initially, it was one. It was called Turkestan, and then it was divided up. And indeed, Tajikistan was the last one to be created in 1929 out of Uzbekistan. So, in terms of size, by far the biggest is Kazakhstan. That is the northern one. It borders Russia. Then the next biggest is Turkmenistan, which borders the Caspian Sea. Then we have Uzbekistan, and then the 2 very small ones are Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. In terms of geography, Kazakhstan is largely steppe land, so it's pretty flat and empty. Now, I don't have population figures for now, but when I visited in the early noughties, there was about 15 million people there, so it's probably about 20-25 now, but that's still tiny considering this is a country the size of Western Europe. And when you consider that there's 2 million in Almaty and about 1 million or so in the capital Astana, and that ain't a lot of people for the rest of the country. And I travelled through it in 2002. I took a 70-odd hour train journey from Tashkent in Uzbekistan to Moscow. Most of that was through Kazakhstan, and there wasn't a lot there. So Turkmenistan is also pretty empty. Again, back in early noughties, there was 5 million people there, I think. So it's a largely empty, largely desert country. And then we have Uzbekistan, which is the powerhouse, or traditionally has always been the powerhouse of Central Asia. I'd say back in the noughties, 25 million people then, which was half of the whole total of the region. So it'd be a lot more now. There's quite high birth rates. And then the 2, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, are very small mountainous republics and with very low population density, so only a few million in each one. Now, in terms of wealth, traditionally Uzbekistan was where it was at. Tashkent was the main city of Central Asia during Soviet times, and that's where the wealth of cultural history is, so places like Samarkand and Bukhara, but also where the material wealth was. And the biggest money earner was cotton. So there was lots of cotton growing there, and the USSR really exploited this. And you may have heard of the Aral Sea, which is between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and maybe Turkmenistan, I'm not sure. And it was essentially a sea that they used for irrigation, and it dried up almost completely. So cotton is the big cash crop in Uzbekistan. Kazakhstan was much poorer during the Soviet region, and it was where they did the stuff that they didn't want the world to know about. So the nuclear testing was there, and they also had their rocket launching place at Baikonur. So that was that. Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, never economically important. However, things are quite different now. These days, I would say by far the richest is Kazakhstan, and that's because it has massive gas reserves that have been exploited. And Kazakhstan, certainly, since I last visited, has really got a lot wealthier. It is by far the wealthiest, most modern of the republics. Another reason is it's the main area through which traffic can pass from China to Europe. So it's part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. And it's been run by and large by a dictator called Nazarbayev, who was very friendly to Russia and China and the West. So he managed to be friends with everyone. And although a dictator, he seemed to be one of the good guys by a lot of people. Um, Uzbekistan has struggled more, but it's still economically growing. I have to say, it looks a lot richer now than when I was there before. It has industry, and of course, it has more of a population, and it still has the cotton. Turkmenistan is very mysterious. It's a very closed-off country. But it has gas reserves as well. But whether these have made the country rich or whether they've just made the leaders rich is another matter. And we don't know too much about Turkmenistan. And Kyrgyzstan is the most open to tourists. It's been visa free for a very long time, and there's a lot of trekking and stuff like that. But there's very little industry there because it's all mountains. And Tajikistan is the poorest. Its GDP per capita is lower than Pakistan. It's less than half that of India. Which tells you the kind of place it's in. It is one of the poorest countries on the planet. Although interesting on the ground, so far it doesn't look as poor as Pakistan. Um, who knows why that is? Maybe we're in the richest bit. But anyway, so that's that. In terms of politics, if I was to do a sliding scale between democracy and authoritarianism, at one end we have Kyrgyzstan, which is the most democratic of them. They have pretty much free and fair elections, and when that's been under threat, there's been people's revolutions that have come out onto the streets to restore democracy, but it hasn't resulted in economic success. The rest are what you would call dictatorships. But Kazakhstan, as I mentioned before, under Nazarbayev, is quite a benign one. He's actually not the leader anymore. He resigned and chose his successor, and many say that so he can rule behind the scenes and ensure his legacy. But it's always been quite a benign dictatorship, that one. And then Uzbekistan was interesting. It was under Islam Karimov. He was quite strict and quite hard, and there were reports of human rights abuses by, I think it was a former British ambassador. But when he died, his successor, whose name escapes me at the moment, but we'll put it in the chat, he's liberalised, it seems, a lot. So one thing I noticed was how liberal it's got towards religion. It's far more Islamic than it used to be. But he's also, Aziz was telling me, for example, before they used to have this policy from the Soviet era where you had to be registered in a certain town and then you couldn't just move to another city, so you couldn't move to the capital before, whereas he got rid of that. So a lot of people have come into the capital. So far more liberal regime, but still very dictatorial. Then you've got Tajikistan. Now, Tajikistan has been ruled by one man, more or less since creation. Obviously, during the war, he came to power, and his name is Ismail Ali Rahman, and his picture is everywhere. It's very like North Korea personality cult. He's stepping forward all the time. We're often seen in fields of poppies. And you don't mess with him, but he's very subservient to Russia because he has to be because of the economic situation of the country, and there are Russian troops situated here. But many people would say it is run as a personal kind of fiefdom for him and his family. And then the final one is Turkmenistan. Now, Turkmenistan could make even the Democratic People's Republic of Korea at times look liberal. It was ruled by a chap called Turkmenbashi, who did things like restart the calendar, named days of the week after himself and his mum, wrote a book that everyone had to study at school, which I've read, and I can't really remember Hanama or something it was called. I read it, it wasn't that inspirational. And basically, I mean, he did mad things like built statues of himself that rotated, showing him giving peace to the world, and renamed cities after himself, well, renamed himself as Turkmenbashi, the father of all Turkmen. And one of my particular favourites was that if you wanted to marry a Turkmen girl, you have to pay, I think it was a $10,000 tax to him personally, and that is purely because Turkmen girls are renowned for their carpet making abilities. So that's that. He died, and his dentist took over. And well, I've forgotten his name, but it's pretty much more of the same. A little bit more less Turkmen Bashi and a little bit more him, but it's the same. Very closed, hard to get in. You've kind of got to go on a group to it. I'd like to one day. Technically, I can say I've been because I went on a railway line that went through a part of the country, but I never got off the train. So that's that. So that's my Central Asian overview. Today we got up early in our hotel and were picked up by Aziz's dad and his son in their car, and they drove us to the border. And the border, there was two border crossings we could use, and they were recommended one in a town, and I forget the name, Bay or something. I can't remember it, but it was renowned for having the largest metallurgical plant in the Soviet Union. It's still there, but a lot of it doesn't work now. And we drove through cotton producing areas, which was quite interesting because that's so important for Uzbekistan. And it was interesting chatting to him about his experiences when he was in the Red Army and about how he thinks the country's going. So I mentioned yesterday that Aziz has got more religious, the father hasn't, and this seems to be a thing that the older generation are not religious and the younger ones are, and this causes some tension sometimes. But he was very interesting to talk to. He really good English and a real gentleman, and yeah, absolute gentleman. Problem is, we got to the border and it was not open to foreigners aside from Uzbeks and Tajiks. So then we had to drive another 40 kilometres to the other border, which we did cross. It was busy, but there was no problems. And then when we got to the side, there was a car that was like waiting to fill up, and he said, well, it would be 50 some to take us. So we sat and waited for the car to fill up, and got talking to a Tajik guy and his Russian wife, or at least partner. They'd driven all the way from Perm to holiday in Tajikistan. And it was good to practice the Russian. And as with everybody, they all thought Tom was Tajik, and they were all quite surprised at his real identity. So that was that. And then but we got fed up waiting for this car, and the guy was faffing around and that. So in the end, we said sod it, and we carried on walking through the border, and we found another car for the same price, and they went straight away. So we came into Khujand, about 50k journey through an absolute desolate wilderness, noticeably poorer than Uzbekistan. I mean, this was the land time forgot. But there were posters of Ismail Ali Rahman up all the way, but really much poorer than where we'd come from. And we got into Khujand, much scruffier, a lot of unmade roads off the main roads and that. But we had a bit of trouble finding our hotel, but we did, and dropped us off there. And it's very nice where we are. It's like a backpackery type hostel place. So we're staying there, and then we got chatting to a very nice German guy actually who's travelling around, and he's going into Afghanistan soon. And apparently, I didn't know this, but if you go from Tajikistan, you can get visa at the border. You don't need to pre-get one, and it's much cheaper. So if I do want to go to Afghanistan in the future, that might be worth considering, because I'd always thought about going through Peshawar. Anyway, we then had a wander into the city, and what a place. I mean, the bazaars were unbelievable. We didn't actually go through most of them because, we said we'll do that tomorrow, but really atmospheric. Like, this is the Central Asia that you're looking for. Off the tourist trail, nothing new, nothing reconstructed, chaotic, very much like you would expect Afghanistan to be. And there's this vast bazaar with a mosque, quite an old mosque complex next to it. But then there's also Soviet monuments, big hoardings of Rahman up everywhere. And it's just brilliant. It's a wonderful place. We dined in a canteen where we had so much food we could hardly eat it all, and it cost us $15 for both of us. And it was out of this world. Like meat dishes, rice dishes. Oh, it was unbelievable. And then we continued on. As we were walking through the main street, we got chatting to a lady who was an English teacher with her kids, and she'd just gone for a day at the beach to sea It was a lake, well, it was a reservoir nearby, but it's as near as you're going to get to a sea around here. And then we went to the main square, which was very Soviet. And there's a fortress next to it, looks largely rebuilt, but it reminded me a bit of the one at Bukhara. And we took a creaking, very slow cable car over the river. A river, I believe, that's mentioned by Alexander the Great. And to the far side, by that time, I was absolutely knackered, so we got a taxi back. It's so hot. I mean, yesterday was stupidly hot, like 40 plus degrees. It's probably 30 odd today, but just drinking all the time. It's so hot. I've turned the air fan off because of the background noise for this video, but I can't wait to turn it back on again. Anyway, that's that. Chilling out now, going to bed. But this is brilliant. Really glad we bothered with Tajikistan. It's this trip is coming to life now. It's a place I've not been before, and it's maybe the Central Asia that I always wanted to see. I didn't quite get to see in my first trip because everything was a bit too spruced up, should we say? So yeah, good stuff. Anyway, this is me, Uncle Travelling Matt. Tomorrow we're going to explore Khujand some more. We then explore another town on the way, and then we're going to the capital. So.